Hello, I'm Corinna Harrod and this is the Monday Night Review. Hello and welcome to episode 104 of the Monday Night Review, 2 days before our second birthday. And we're having a bit of a palate cleanse, having had the Zodiac for 3 full episodes. Thank you to everyone who sent me lovely comments. It's much appreciated. This week, the episode was chosen by my husband. I said I wanted a palate cleanser, and he loves a heist. So it's also fitted in quite well because my darling mouse, the oldest pod dog, had a vestibular attack last week, which is basically the equivalent of a doggy stroke, and has been really unwell. And I was very concerned that she would not make her 13th birthday in August, but she seems to be on the mend, thank goodness. But my brain has not been with it. I'd also like to give a big shout out to my friend Sarah, who as always has given me the beauteous voice notes for my Italian pronunciation, which I will no doubt mess up anyway. It's also my favourite time of year, May in England, when the weather decides to behave. Pretty unbeatable. I'm a big fan of cow parsley, and it is here in abundance right now. So I've been enjoying that. Simple country girl with simple pleasures. The sources for this week's episode are a Guardian article called Wolf's Last Stand, Wikipedia, obviously, the Free Library, British Newspaper Archive, loads. You can go and have a rummage around if you want to find out more. Valerio Vice was born in Ascoli Piceno in the Marche region in Italy in 1955. He grew up in a wealthy family. His father was a very hotshot libel lawyer. His mother owned a boutique. Despite all of this, or perhaps because of it, Vice became involved in crime from an early age. When I originally started reading about him, I imagined a sort of dapper Italian bad boy. But he seems, in fact, to be a bit of a wide boy, bordering on the ridiculous. A thief by 16, he went to university in Rome to study either law or philosophy, depending on where you're reading. I think law is probably more likely, considering his father being a lawyer and his brother. But in the 70s, he fell under the influence of the neo-fascist terrorist leader Gianni Nardi and joined the youth group Fronte della Gioventù, daubing swastikas on public buildings and carrying out bombings, blowing up an electricity power station when he was 17. He racked up a suspected 54 robberies, and it seemed that politics became a distant motive, and he just wanted to be a criminal superstar. He is the epitome of wanting to cheat the grind. He loves the playboy lifestyle, does not like having to do any work. He would later say, quote, "For a short time I was involved in politics, but I soon realised it wasn't worth it and just started robbing banks. I enjoyed the thrill of the chase with the police." It would seem that it wasn't necessarily that he didn't realise politics was worth it. I think people thought he was a bit of a dick, and therefore he wasn't sort of welcomed with open arms. And it seems, in his own words, I've seen a couple of quotes where he says that he knew he wanted to be the top of a field. He didn't specify which field, and I think that perhaps had people in politics, in the sort of right-wing politics that he liked, not found him weird and ridiculous, he might have stuck with it. In 1986, he fled to the United Kingdom after being released on bail following a robbery in Milan, though he was apparently wanted for over 50 other armed robberies. Once in London, Vice lived the high life, saying, quote, "I had a passion for weapons, beautiful women and fast cars." He lived in St John's Wood, which was a very, and is still, a shishi area, and was seen with several attractive blondes on his arm, including Lady Bienvenida Buck, who will come into the story later on. He has a definite type. There's a lot of tabloid stuff going on with this case, and you can see the sort of woman he goes for. It's a very 80s type. And he continues his criminal activities, becoming involved in one of the biggest bank heists in London's history. He desperately tried to get a gun. He was rumoured to have owned a gun from early teens. He thought that is what made you a big deal, owning a gun, but gun laws in the UK are pretty tough, and it made it almost impossible for him to get one, and he spent quite a lot of money trying to get one, and eventually he buys for loads of money these two crap guns, one of which just won't even work and ends up being chucked away, but one is this sort of filthy rusty Beretta which he would go on to use and love, even though I think probably it wasn't quite as flashy as he wished it was. I will say one thing for him, and he was the first person to successfully rob the Royal Bank Coutts, which is worth noting because he is a bit of a farcical character. But we're talking about the Knightsbridge Safety Deposit robbery today. And the Knightsbridge Security Deposit Company was on Cheval Place in Knightsbridge. If you don't know where Knightsbridge is, it's an area of London in Westminster, but it's where Harrods is. It's a very cosmopolitan area. If you've got a lot of money and you're coming to London, Knightsbridge is the place to be. And the Knightsbridge Security Deposit Company is known for its high security standards, and it was therefore a very attractive target for robbers. But it was seemingly an expanding company, but that's not the case behind the scenes. The managing director, Parvez Latif, had met Vichay in swanky London nightclubs like Annabelle's, and he was himself heavily in debt, and he was a heavy cocaine user, and so he was living this lifestyle of Annabelle's and all the swanky Knightsbridge drinking places, and this heavy cocaine use, which was part of the 80s London scene, but was about to lose his business because he was so in debt. Now, Vichay, already a bank robber, preferred to keep his belongings, his valuables, in deposit boxes rather than banks, understandably, because he'd robbed so many of them. And many other rich and famous London high flyers did the same. If you had something that, for some reason you didn't trust banks, you didn't have the paperwork or whatever necessary to use a bank in London, or you wanted no questions asked about what you were keeping secure, a security deposit box was the place to do it. Not only was there money and jewels stashed in these deposit boxes, but there was incriminating photographs, other documents, and loads of drugs. Basically, if you had a safety deposit box, you could put a shed load of coke in there and go in and have a toot whenever you wanted. And that worked well in the 80s for London nightlife. Latif and Vichay agreed that they would stage a robbery, and they would take a third of the haul each, and the other third would be divided amongst the hire help that Vichay was going to provide. Latif was vital, obviously, because this isn't a case with banks in the 80s. Some did have bulletproof glass or security measures, and Vichay had actually robbed a bank where he'd continuously been sort of thumped around by the metal security gate that would go up and down. And this security centre was known for its security, which is why it was used by so many of the great and good and rich and famous. Now, Latif showed Vichay round in the guise of a potential client so that Vichay could plan his robbery. He needed to see the layout, what was going on. So you go in to the safety deposit centre. There's a locked outer door with a guard, a vault with a bulletproof door that's also guarded, and a locked gate that you need a key to use to get in there. The boxes themselves are locked individually, and there's 80s CCTV all over the building that is watched by one of the guards. So to make this successful, Vichay needed one corner that wasn't covered by the cameras so that he could hold the guards. He could subdue one guard, put him in this corner so that the other guard didn't get the wind up, and then he could secure the other guard. Luckily for him, there was such a place. For those who kept their coke stash in this lockbox, they often wanted somewhere private where they could go and hoof a line as soon as they got there. And so there was a little recess with a pillar in front of it where they could go and do this. People could do diamond sales or whatever nefarious business without being caught on camera or being watched. So Vichay notes this recess. Latif also tells Vichay that what the guard's rota is, and would ensure that no one who was working on the day of Vichay's visit, when he was masquerading as a potential new customer, would be working on the day of the robbery. And in fact, this was impossible. There was one guard who was there both times, so Vichay had to be very careful. And between them, Latif decided a Sunday was a good day. There would be a skeleton staff on duty. The roads in London would be quieter, meaning that the getaway van could be parked easily. The men would be able to get the haul out of the door and into the van without being observed. Sunday was the day. The plan was that Latif was going to show Vichay and his besooted accomplice around, as he had done previously, as if they were new customers. And when they were downstairs in the vault, they would tie up the guard that was downstairs once he'd opened the sort of guard room where all the cameras were, and keep him in the recess behind the pillar. Then Vichay, treating Latif as a terrified hostage, would tell him to call down the other guard, and when the other guard came downstairs, he too would be subdued. The rest of the team would be round the corner in a van, dressed as security guards, and once notified on the walkie-talkies, they would come in, they would place a sign on the door to say that it was temporarily closed, and they would come downstairs. Then some more men would appear with large suitcases which would contain tools needed to break into the security boxes, and these cases also had to be big enough to carry the haul out to the van. The robbers were to focus on the medium-sized boxes, which were deemed to contain stuff big enough to bother with, but not so big that it was like a family heirloom antique that would take up the strength of two of the men just to get it outside. The safety deposit centres had a security guard that went round each of the security centre locations to check that all was in order. So they had to plan the robbery around his arrival to either subdue him and tie him up or do it before he arrived. They planned to fill 2 large 6-foot by 4-foot polythene bags, load them into the van, and then drive to a garage that had been rented by an accomplice. Then they would unload the swag into trunks and suitcases, pay off the heavies, and tell them all to get out of the country. Vichay obviously was in charge of choosing the men. Latif was a businessman. He was born in Israel. He was educated in England. His family were businessmen in England. And he had bought the Knightsbridge Safety Deposit Centre I think from receivers for about £1 million. And it was going to be his way of branching out from his family business. And he had driven it into the ground, possibly through his partying and his coke ways. But he was not, though he was dodgy, he was not a sort of out-and-out crim like Vichay was. So he didn't know anyone that they could use. And also they couldn't use anyone that was linked to him because he is linked to the venue. So Vichay was in charge of finding the men for the job. And he wanted to choose men that he hadn't worked with before so that they couldn't be traced to him or recognised. The only person that he got in on the job, who he'd worked with before, he'd robbed a bank with before, was a man called Eric Rubens, who he had, as I said, worked with before, and was middle-aged and in ill health, but he was deemed satisfactory to be the besuited accomplice that would go in initially with Vichay to be shown around the security centre. Vichay also chose Israel Pincus, who was a midweight conman who had no police record in the UK. David Poole, who basically was a cokehead friend of his, who was just kind of his buddy, who he liked to have around. We've all got one of them. So he was there. They were going to dress as security guards and be in the van, but they needed someone who was strong and able to carry stuff. So Peter O'Donoghue was also included because Poole and Rubens were middle-aged. And then another man from overseas joined the gang, but his identity has never been officially revealed. Now, they needed someone who was going to be in charge of things, the boring stuff, the admin of things like renting the van, renting a garage for the van to be taken to, renting a flat for Vichay to lie low in, and for the hall to be taken to. So Steve Mann, who is a building society employee with no criminal record, is brought in as the man to sort out the necessary properties and garage and rent and all of that stuff. Pincus is in charge of getting the guard's uniform. Vichay goes to Selfridges to buy the tools for the robbery. And for some reason, I think this says a lot about Vichay. If for those who don't know, Selfridges is a huge department store in central London on Oxford Street. You can get a lot there, but it is a very certain type of person who does their big shop or any kind of regular shop in Selfridges. I would go to Selfridges if I was buying. I bought some Ray-Bans once, and I bought them from Selfridges. They had a very good sushi place in Selfridges for a while. You can get a really good Reuben sandwich in Selfridges. Their food hall is lovely. Their makeup hall is lovely. It is where you go for a treat or for Christmas shopping, or, it's where rich people go for their regular shopping. It was worth noting that he went to Selfridges, bought some tools, got completely baffled by the tools during the robbery, and ended up using a sledgehammer instead. So the day of the robbery is set for the 12th of July 1987. Two men, Vichay and Rubens, enter the Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Centre and request to rent a safe deposit box and be shown round and to be shown how everything works. If you're putting your diamonds or whatever in a safety deposit box, they expect you to ask about security and all of this. So obviously Latif is there ready to show them round. They are shown round, they see the vault, and they say that they want to be shown the security room, where this guard sits, what the PIN codes are, what all of that is. And so this, again, is normal. And as the guard opens the door, they draw out their handgun and the handcuffs that they've bought in their briefcases and tie up the security guard around this pillar. Latif gets a shock because obviously he is playing the part of the store manager, as he should do. And he gets sort of pushed around and a Beretta shoved in his face by Vichay, who says, you've got to get the other guard down here. So he calls up to the other guard and says, can you bring some leaflets down to show these two gentlemen? The other guard arrives, he gets tied up, and Vichay then summons his other accomplices in the van. Unfortunately, they have not done a run through with their walkie-talkies. They will have the volume turned down. So in the end, Rubens has to go up, get the guys from the van. The two men, Pincus and Toole, come dressed as security guards. They put a sign on the door saying that it is temporarily closed, and then they summon again on the walkie-talkies the other men. The walkie-talkies again don't work, so they have to go and get these men. So it's not without its mishaps. Vichay would go on to say that the first box they broke into held more than £1 million worth of cash and jewels. Cash is the dream. It's easy to carry. It does what it says. You don't have to, you have to sell jewels. You have to fence other stuff. Cash is cash is cash. And he was like, this was the dream. There was just rolls and rolls and rolls of banknotes. Within half an hour, their haul included a kilo block of cocaine and over $500,000 in new $100 bills. They broke open an estimated 120 safe deposit boxes and left with a hoard estimated to be worth between 40 to 60 million pounds. That's in 1987. That's 107 to 161 million pounds today. Before they left, Vichay gave each man £10,000 and told them to get out of the country and lie low. All but one, the unnamed accomplice, then got into the van. The unnamed accomplice walks off to freedom. As far as we know, we don't know who that person is. Whether they got caught doing something else, whether that was enough for them and they've just got off scot-free, we don't know. Things do not go well. They have all this swag. The rented garage is too small for the van, so they have to actually unload it on the street. They unload it outside a rented flat, which is great. It's got empty flats below it. It's got trees in front of it shielding the view, but it is 3 floors up. They're having to carry everything 3 floors up. It would also turn out that at some point Vichay had cut his finger and left bloody fingerprints everywhere, which would later be found by forensic investigators. Vichay had forgotten his gloves for the raid and said that it didn't really matter. Police didn't have his fingerprints. This is obviously before a huge database of DNA and fingerprints, so he's not too worried, and he's right. But what he doesn't realise is that the police, they go through everything. This is all they have. This is a big deal. That is a lot of money, and it's a lot of influential people's money that has been taken, and jewels and God knows what else. So all they have to go on are these fingerprints, and they eventually they go through everything they have, and eventually they find this small file of suspected political offenders that Interpol had sent them, and Vichay's are in this folder. They had wanted to speak to Vichay in connection with an attempted train bombing in the 1970s. And so they have their man. They then find his white Ferrari, and in his white Ferrari, they find his filofax, because this is the 80s. And because it's the 80s, and there are no mobile phones, his filofax contains all his contacts, and this leads to them finding his accomplices. The first person they contact is Israel Pincus. Police also know that they will have to track down someone inside. The way that this is being carried out, from what the guards can tell them and from what Latif tells them, they came in, they knew about the guards, they knew about shutting the shop, they knew about too much for there to not be an inside person. Latif is seemingly above suspicion. It's his business. He comes from a wealthy family. He seems wealthy himself. He's the person that on the face of it, has the most to lose. His business is in shreds. He has to personally repay one box owner with £35,000 from his own money. None of this would point to Latif at all. But police soon realised that none of the employees were behaving as the police would expect if they had been involved in such a successful robbery. So they'd either expect the person to stop coming to work, or to have said to someone, to take credit, to be boasting for being involved in such a successful heist, or to have some sort of different behaviour. But everyone still turned up for work, or, I mean, obviously they didn't because it's a police investigation, but they couldn't pin it down on anyone. Eventually, they found receipts showing that Vichay had gone to Israel with Latif's living girlfriend 2 weeks after the robbery. I can't work out whether Latif knew whether it was a straightforward swap, but basically Latif was living with this woman. 2 weeks after the robbery, she is in Israel with Vichay, and the police are like, well, that would be a real coincidence if he's just shacked up with the girlfriend of the man whose business he's just successfully robbed, and they've met completely randomly. Vichay allegedly, after the raid, filled his bath with banknotes and glittering jewels, covered the floor of his flat in Hampstead, and just sort of rolled around in it like Scrooge McDuck. I don't know that he rolled around in it, but he definitely watched the light sparkle and shine off it. One diamond alone is said to be worth £4 million. And the reason they're so vague about the actual amount that was stolen is that 30 key holders never came forward. So you can assume that is people who have either drugs or illegal ill-gotten gains or something in there that they will not go to the police about. After a period of surveillance, several of the accomplices are arrested during a series of coordinated raids on the 12th of August 1987, and they're later convicted. So the 12th of August, that's sort of a month after the heist, which I think is pretty good going considering we're so reliant on computers and stuff now, and this was all done by good old-fashioned police work. But yes, they find Israel Pincus's information in the Filofax. They then trail him. They find that he's met with someone else. They then surveil him. There's a lot of old school surveillance going on, and people not having done what they were told and getting the hell out of the country. So they're doing this intensive investigation, the police, and they arrest 6 suspects, including the mastermind behind the heist, Valerio Vichay. Now, Vichay has initially fled to South America. Well, we know he went to Israel. He then goes to South America. But there's something that he wants that he cannot get in South America. Vichay wants his Ferrari. So he goes back to the UK, gets his Ferrari, and awaits for it to be shipped. And while he's doing that, he's arrested. He's charged with the conspiracy to rob, and once he's caught, he's able to act out a role he probably enjoys more than any of his criminal activity. Allegedly, he is a huge fan of Al Pacino's Tony Montana in Scarface, and throughout his court hearings, anytime he jokes, he boasts, he wears sunglasses, he loves the press and the attention. He told the judge, quote, "Maybe I'm a romantic lunatic, but money was the last thing on my mind." He is just loves the attention. Also sentenced were Israel Pincus, Peter O'Donoghue, and Eric Rubens, who had to be extradited from Israel. Steve Manns, who was the sort of admin person, gets as soon as he's tracked down, he sings like a bird and he gets off the lightest, but he still gets a sentence. And the papers had a field day. This was classic 80s tabloid stuff with tales of cocaine-fueled orgies, billionaires' wives romping with both Latif and Vichay, including Pamela Seamarks, who would go on to be charged with receiving that. She was the girlfriend. Vichay is sentenced to 22 years in prison. He's unfussed by this. One of the longest sentences ever handed down for a robbery in the UK, and he's sent to Parkhurst Prison on the Isle of Wight. I'm not sure how he had felt about this. I believe that Parkhurst Prison is not terrible. I mean, obviously it's prison. But it's not exactly the glittering London limelight of prisons, is it? So, and while in prison, he forms a friendship with one of the men responsible for his arrest, Dick Leach, and in their letters they give each other nicknames. Leach gets called Fred, and Vichay, who loves the nickname, gets called the Wolf. And this is the thing, a lot of people, he seems very Marmite, Vichay. A lot of people say he's basically an idiot going around courting the press, bungling stuff, saying stupid things, doing all of this. And then you have people like Leach who say that he's very charming. I mean, he did successfully rob some banks, which I don't think I could do. We've talked about the Dog Day Afternoon bank robbery. That didn't go well. That was seemingly easier than what Vichay's achieved. So it's very difficult to know where. I feel like he's a bit of a bumbling idiot, to be honest with you. And I never like a man who thinks too much of himself. So there we are. But yeah, he gets called the Wolf. And then under the Treaty of Strasbourg, he's extradited to Italy and transferred to a jail in Pescara on the Adriatic coast to finish the rest of his sentence. Now, Lady Bienvenida Buck, his one-time girlfriend, was instrumental in this extradition. She was a regular visitor to him. She wrote to him all the time. And her husband, Sir Anthony Buck, QC, campaigned to have Vichay sent back to Italy. And I can see why. If your much, 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 much younger wife is constantly writing to and visiting her ex-Italian stallion in prison, probably him being as far away as possible is to your benefit. So Pescara is an open prison, and within 3 years, Vichay is leaving at 7:30 in the morning, working in his company all day, living the life of Riley, having nice lunches, doing as he wanted, as long as he returned to prison at 10:30 p.m. And he claimed to be a reformed character, and he put this partly down to the wonderful Italian open prison system. And in an interview with a British journalist, he said, quote, "The legal system in Italy may look softer than yours, but it's not. The only difference is that the rehabilitation program does not discriminate like in your country. But in fact, while in prison, he was befriending mafia members, getting into things he shouldn't have been. He tried to run away twice. He tried to escape twice. He wasn't behaving very well. And I'm pretty sure that he's not a good advertisement for the open prison system. Interestingly, only 10 million from the robbery was ever recovered. Considering they think, 10 million, I believe that's in 1980s money. So that's a quarter, perhaps, of what they got away with. Pretty impressive. They were all pretty chill about going to the prison as well, as you would be, because you got a mega ton of money waiting for you when you get out. Valerio Vichay would die on a lonely dirt track, shot by a policeman, his body then dumped by his accomplices. Police officers had become suspicious when they spotted a car on a country lane near Ascoli at about 11:30 p.m. on the 18th of April 2000, with two men standing beside it. A quick check showed the Lancia was registered as stolen, and the two men would turn out to be Vichay and mafia mobster Antonio Malatesta. The pair had met and made friends while in prison, and the officers pull over, They get out, they start walking towards the men, asking for their documents. Now, Malatesta runs off immediately, but Vichai, of course he's armed, pulls out his semi-automatic Magnum 357 handgun and shoots Officer Enzo Baldini. He then begins to approach the wounded policeman to presumably finish him off, but Baldini manages to fire his machine gun. 15 rounds go into Vichai, spinning him round and killing him. He's then dragged into the car by one of the henchmen who's been in the car all along. The car speeds off, but they pretty much dump him out of the car as soon as they realise he's dead. He's dead before he hits the ground, probably, with that many machine gun rounds. Vichai's body is later found on the road to Teramo, 100 miles east of Rome. At the time, Vichai was still serving his 22-year sentence for the Knightsbridge security deposit robbery. It was a meticulously planned and executed heist, though we know there were some bumbles, but it caught the public's attention for its audacity and complexity. The mastermind behind it was, by his own words, a failure. He said, quote, "The rule of the game is that if they don't catch you, you're a genius. But if they do, you're a miserable nobody." And that is the story of the Knightsbridge safety deposit robbery. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If there is any case, true crime, paranormal, weird, criminal, whatever, that you'd like me to cover, then do email me at themondaynighreview@gmail.com. You can find me on social media at The Monday Night Review, on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and you can come and join the Patreon, where there are loads of extra episodes and stories every week, and you get discounts on merch, and you get my never-ending love. You find us on the Patreon at The Monday Night Review, and until next time, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seat before you drive.